Keith Wilson, thank you for joining us once again. There's been a lot of information running out on the interwebs these days. And when it comes to independence, I know there's a lot of unverified information or confusion that might be going around. So thanks for joining us today to go over what's happening. Let's talk about Bill 14, because that kind of kicked everything off yesterday. Maybe explain it into crayon to those who maybe don't understand the legal process, what we're looking at with Bill 14 and how this affects us moving forward with independence.
Sure, there's a lot of complexity here, and I think I can break it down for you and your listeners, because I know there's a lot of interest and some confusion. The bottom line is Bill 14 is a great day for democracy. It's a great day for the supremacy of the legislature, and it's a great day for those of us in the independence movement. So what am I talking about? Many will be aware that the Alberta Prosperity Project, APP, has been working towards trying to get the Alberta government to have a referendum on independence. And the vehicle they had available, the legal vehicle that the APP had available to them to do that, is the Citizens Initiative Act. And that act allows a group to come together like the APP and file an application and say, hey, we want to hold a petition. And if we get enough people to sign it, that petition will require the Alberta government to hold an independence referendum. So APP filed their petition application in the late summer of 2025 of this year. And rather than approve the petition question, which would have allowed the APP to go out and collect the 177,000 signatures over 120 days that are required to have a successful citizen initiative. Mm-hmm. The chief electoral officer decided to send it to the courts to have the Court of King's Bench review it to see if it would be constitutional. And the reason that could happen was within the Citizen Initiative Act, there's this weird old carryover section that said something like any petition question has to be able to or should not contravene the charter and the Constitution. And the very concept makes no sense that those words are there. They were carryover from a previous version of the act from years ago. Because let me just pause for a minute, Derek, and lay out how independence is achieved in Canada under our legal system. So back when Quebec was looking to separate and have independence, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in the 1998 reference case and said, if a province, any province, decides it wants to be independent, it can hold a province-wide vote on a clear question of independence, succession, the legal term. And if a majority vote in favor, then that province then enters into mandatory good faith negotiations with the other provinces, with the federal government, and First Nations. So there's a fundamental check and balance in the process right there, okay? So now let's step back. So why would it make any sense to have a check at the very start of the process when the parties could agree in those negotiations, those independence negotiations, to change people's rights? That could be part of their negotiation and their agreement. So the section never made any sense at all. It never fit. It's like a tool in the toolbox that you'd never have a job to work on with, right? Like, it's what's this doing here?
Right.
Be a little bit like you finding one of your kids' toddler toys in your actual toolbox. It's like, no, this little blue building block isn't going to help me fix the dryer. So in any event, well, it didn't matter. The chief electoral officer sent it to the courts, and Justice Feasby was assigned to hear the case, and it was getting bogged down. And so the Alberta legislature announced this week announced Bill 14. And Bill 14 basically says it was never our intent to hand this off to the courts. We believe that citizens should decide what questions they're going to put to a vote. And that's democracy. That's the best democracy you can get, when you empower your citizens to come together and persuade their neighbors of something and let them vote on it. So the legislature is now amending the Citizens Initiative Act to remove that problematic section, that weird tool in the toy box that doesn't do anything and is now being used for mischief. And in addition, the legislature said this court case needs to stop because it was never our intention as the lawmakers in this province to have this happen. Now, let me explain the concept of parliamentary supremacy. Under our legal system, we have in our parliamentary democracy, we have this thing called parliamentary supremacy. That means that any sitting legislature can make laws, can repeal laws, and can amend laws. And they can even do it retroactively. And this happens with quite a bit of frequency, actually, in the federal level and across all provinces. So when the legislature, as the supreme lawmaker and maker of policy, remember, the legislature and the MLAs and the MPs make the law and policy, and the courts are there to interpret it, okay, and apply it.
Yep.
So when the lawmakers see the courts are getting it wrong and the chief electoral officers getting it wrong, and you may or may not recall, but some of your viewers will, is that when the chief electoral officer in September announced that he was sending this to the court, the premier held a press conference and issued a press statement, and the Minister of Justice wrote a letter to the chief electorate and said, "What are you doing? This was never our intention. Pull this back. Like, this is not what we wanted as the law of Alberta." So it is an absolutely proper function for a legislature when they see that their law is not being properly applied or is being abused to amend the law to make their legislative intention clear. That's what the government, fortunately, is doing through a Bill 14. And it clarifies that this section is being misused. It was never intended to be that way. Removes that section and tells the court, shut it down. This was not what we expected as lawmakers for you to do. So now the Alberta Prosperity Project can reapply, can then go collect their signatures in the new year. And then I'm confident, because they have 20,000 volunteers to collect signatures, they need 177,000 people to sign. They've got over 200,000 people who've committed to sign already. I think they'll surpass the 177. It'll be a little more difficult because of the time of year than Mr. Lukasik had in the summer, but I think they'll get there. And that will then obligate the Smith government to hold a province-wide referendum on independence. And just from a timing point of view, I think that'll occur in October, mid-October of 2026. So that's all good news. Now, okay, but Feasby writes he releases a decision today. He should not have done that, with all due respect. He should have said, in view of what the legislature has just announced, I'm adjourning this case until the bill becomes law. And then he will dismiss the application on the basis that he doesn't have jurisdiction anymore, because the legislature said this isn't something that should be in the courts. So instead of doing that, he released a lengthy, politically charged decision that goes on and deals with all kinds of hypotheticals about what the independence question might have meant and what impact it might have on treaty rights and charter rights and other things. That makes no sense because, as I explained earlier, all these things are subject to negotiation way down the road after the independence vote has been successful. But what's really clear is his decision in no way limits the authority of the Alberta government or any other government to hold an independence referendum. And he's not suggesting that it does. And, at the end of the day, his decision amounts to a nothing burger because it's interpreting a piece of legislation that's a section in a law that's just been repealed. So very good news for independence today. Very good news for democracy. There'll be some sensationalism around the wording and the content of Justice Feasby's decision. I don't think it was consistent with the rule of law for him to have released it, with due respect to the court. I think that was an error and an egregious one. I don't think it's going to build confidence in the administration of justice. There's already a tremendous level of concern in Alberta and across the country that we have degraded ourselves into a two-tiered justice system has this political overlay with everything it does. This isn't going to help restore confidence in the justice system. But I'm very pleased that the Smith government has upheld the role of the supremacy of the legislature.
Well, and it's good to see because it does spell positive vibes moving forward for independent, a massive leap. In fact, a lot of people said, well, it muddies the waters a little. It doesn't really give us a lot of information because people were asking as early as last night, well, when do we start signing? When do we start getting things in order? And we're trying to explain to people there's a 30-day wait and then they can reapply, and we've got to get back on with their contracts in the new year. A number of people keep mentioning, and maybe you could shed some light on this, Keith, because there's been talk going around from different outlets, whether it's town halls at APP or different interviews I've watched, where people say how crucial it is that once we get to a referendum question, it is a single question ballot, that it's not intertwined with anything maybe that we saw at the Alberta Next panels when it comes to a private police force or a Canada or Alberta pension plan or anything like that. Do you feel it's that crucial that this needs to be a single question ballot?
Well, let's clarify that, and I'm glad you asked me that question because I get it a lot too. There's a nuance there that we need to break down. You can have multiple ballots, right? So look at the last time the referendum legislation was used in Alberta under the Kenney government. There was two ballots. There was one that dealt with asking you whether you wanted a review of equalization. And the other was asking whether or not you wanted to change to daylight savings time. No problem. So we can have in the fall of 2026, we can have a ballot that says, whatever the wording ultimately is, are you for or against independence? And then we could have a ballot that says, are you for or against an Alberta pension plan? Are you for or against an Alberta police force? Are you for another ballot? Are you for or against? I voted at the UCP convention, and my memory is I was handed 5 different colored ballots. I didn't get these and go, oh my God, what do I do now? Right? I went, okay, there's 3 names on this one. I'm voting for this lady. Oh, there's 2 names on this one. I'm voting for this guy. And then I went and put them in the right colored boxes. We actually train toddlers with different shapes and colors in that little thing.
Yes.
Get to put them in. I think we can handle adults, those over the age of 18, Alberta residents that'll be allowed to vote in the referendum will handle quite easily a ballot that deals with independence, and at the same voting booth, a ballot that may deal with other Alberta Next panel decisions. I have no concern about that. I mean, it creates a broader range of options. It avoids a forcing of a hard decision. Someone might decide not even to vote on the independence one and just say, I want all these other things. I want police force. I want Alberta pension. But I don't see any problem there. If the question on independence becomes too convoluted, at some point, I'm not suggesting you do it now, but if you haven't, bring up the question they used in Quebec when they had their independence referendum, and bring up the English version of it. And the first thing you're going to do when you read it out to all your viewers, you're going to go, what does this even mean? Like, it was so convoluted and abstract and hypothetical. So the question in Alberta is going to have to be extremely clear. And I think it's going to have to not just be clear, it's going to have to be legally precise. And I think the way to achieve that precision is to use the language from the Federal Clarity Act. And I don't have it at my fingertips, but it'll be a very straightforward question about whether you want to have Alberta become an independent country.
Right. Well, so as we get into that, and again, a lot of questions that have been coming, maybe you can clarify as well. Tom Lukaszik's petition. So now he's garnered 400 and some odd thousand verified signatures. And while I don't feel his question is technically constitutional, while Danielle Smith has said, hey, you asked a question and it requires answering. What happens if APP starts garnering their signatures now? Is it just combined into a referendum vote, or do they just omit one and put forward the other? How does that work moving forward with Tom McKasick now?
Yeah, one of the confusing things about this process is when when Lukasik prepared his request for a referendum and said what the referendum question should be, he did that. He filled out the forms. I keep reposting them on my X account
Yes.
because he's claiming he never asked for a referendum. In fact, he did.
Hmm.
It's clear. There's no ambiguity at all. That's the only thing he asked for. Alberta Prosperity Project, same thing. We want a referendum. Here's the question. However, the way the law works is once that the threshold is triggered and that requires the Alberta government to invoke the Referendum Act, it then is up to the Alberta government to decide the wording of the question. So
Okay.
it doesn't mean the question you set becomes the question they ask. They now have to interpret the intent of that question and what it means. And then they have to put it into what they think is more precise legal language. And if it's an independence question, it's incumbent upon the Alberta government under the Referendum Act to ensure that the wording of the question complies with the Federal Clarity Act.
Yes.
So Thomas Lukasik has created a sufficient condition for the Alberta government to frame an independence question and put it to a vote in October. And I'm very confident that the Alberta Prosperity Project will also similarly trigger that requirement. And then I'm confident that the lawyers at Alberta Justice, working with the cabinet and the premier's office, will develop the appropriately worded question, and they will announce at some point in 2026 that here's the date of the referendum, and here's the question or the series of questions arising
Hmm.
from Alberta Next Panel and so on. So that's I hope
So
that provides some clarity.
yeah, so it actually leads into my next question because I've seen a lot of the AGM was insane, and with the talks of the MOU and everything that's going on with Carney, you see individuals that run parties like the Alberta Republicans with Cam Davies asking, "Hey, does this what happens when the Alberta government lets us or allows us to have a referendum? We gather our signatures and they still shut it down, and they say we're not going to entertain a referendum." I've always stood on the fence that, hey, the genie's out of the bottle. When you look at that rally that happened in Edmonton, when you look at the push behind these signatures, it was made very clear to me in Danielle's office when I met with her a few weeks ago. Look, 400,000 Albertans have had their say. It's time to give all 3 million registered Albertans the opportunity to have their say. Uh, you've dealt with legal politics and constitutional amendments throughout your entire career. What do you think the odds are that the Alberta government won't give us a vote if we even garner the signatures, or if they'll withhold a referendum?
Um, well, close to zero. And if they were to take that course, then they will be signing their own political death warrant.
Mhm.
They won't be in power. The party will split, and it might split in enough different directions that we will have the NDP and Premier Nenshi.
Yeah, that's my
And
top
we know that
concern, and
it's obvious.
yeah, it's one of the things I've been trying to kind of write the course with this channel for a long time, is that I feel if we are going to make the move for independence, we definitely at this point need the UCP in order to get to independence for the foundations that they've set in place. But at the same time, the attacks are going to come, and I mean, once APP is allowed to garner their signatures, you see everything that happened this week with Danielle Smith with her French interview and everything else that's coming out the pike. That uh, well,
And
the
that
war
was
on
fake
words is
news,
starting.
right?
It
You
is
know
fake
that was
news, and it's too bad because I reached out to the premier's office before Jason Levine, and all they said back to me was the premier stands with a sovereign
maybe
Alberta
they
within a
should have.
united Canada. So it's okay.
It's good
Well,
that they
that's
finally released the English version because it's pretty clear what she said. She said the same thing she said 100 times before, and
yep,
it was the CBC playing their political mischief for their liberal masters and trying to
yep.
stoke division for sure.
Well, and it's only going to heat up from there, and that's where I keep telling people, you got to focus eye on the prize. I think independence, getting the vote, getting the signatures, is going to be top priority. In the meantime, my suggestion is we let Danielle just do her job, and we continue marching forward on that referendum until we get a date. So,
Yeah, and another comment I'd make about what you just said is that one of the things I've found throughout my lifetime and having been involved in various political transitions and movements and seeing big shifts in society and Alberta society on policy and ways of looking at the world is that political parties don't lead. They don't
mhm,
lead, they follow. And it should be that way. They follow the people. And because if enough Albertans have a strong view on a particular topic, it doesn't matter what the topic is. And if you're a candidate for a political party and you want to get elected and your party wants to have power, then you have to be responsive to that view. So part of me, I've been, I can't express my relief and gratitude enough for the leadership of Premier Smith on so many issues, protecting our children from this crazy ideology of gender, um, uh, recognizing the government's on some political witch hunt for lawful firearms owners,
mhm,
uh, stopping professional bodies from censoring us, including me, and re-educating me because I had to go through one of those, and all of these other things that I could list that she's done. But there's things that I fundamentally disagree with her on, and we're adults and we're allowed to have that. And my problem is I don't think Canada wants to be fixed.
mhm,
So and that's when she got booed, when she talked about fixing Canada. And frankly, I'm uninterested in fixing Canada. I'm done with the rest of Canada.
yeah,
And you can't fix somebody that doesn't think they're broken.
yeah,
And so that's where the problem we have is, you know, how are you possibly going to convince Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, um, I'm missing one. Um, anyway, no, yeah, those three and Manitoba, all of whom receive around 20% of their annual revenue, their provincial budget revenue, from equalization payments, largely from Alberta,
mm,
right? They're just not going to say, yeah, it's okay. We don't need 20% of our budget. We'll cut our healthcare and our schools and our jails. No, they're not going to
yeah,
do that. Um, and then they just see the world through a different lens. They're okay with the government looking after every aspect of their life. And in fact, they expect it. When they wake up in the morning, culturally, I've found from meeting people across the country and spending time in central and eastern Canada's, they want the government to figure out all of the things around them. And they want to know what the government's going to give them today. Whereas here in
absolutely.
Alberta, we just want to do the stuff we want to get done. And we hope like heck, the government's not going to get in our way and we don't need your stuff. Thank you very much.
There you go.
So we're just, so is the premier going to change the cultural attitudes of Quebec and Eastern Canada and Ontario? I don't think so. Um, I'm not optimistic about that. I mean, I applaud her for her efforts, and she's going to keep trying no matter what, and good for her for that. But I just don't think the rest of Canada sees itself as broken, and I don't think they want to fix anything, and they're quite dismissive of Albertans.
Well, I think Mitch Sylvester said it best when he said, "Come on, let's go." And I think we're there, Keith. And hopefully, in the new year, we can announce that that petition's underway, and once again garner those signatures. It's going to be interesting in comparison to Lekazik's petition, just how many signatures APP can
It
gather.
will be.
Like you
That
said,
will be
it's
interesting. And at a
yeah, the
tough
time of
time,
year.
snowbirds are
Yeah.
away, all these things, but we'll see what'll happen. But I just want to close on this. You mentioned how strange and odd that UCP convention was. And I'm going to put out a theory right now that might be a little
Mhm.
controversial. I noticed that one of the odd and unusual things that happened at that convention was there was a mystical appearance of a certain high
Oh,
profile Albertan, and it was the most Albertan man in the world
Oh,
showed
I
up.
thought you were going to say I
Wait,
was
wait,
there.
just let me finish. Let me finish. And I noticed because I had my picture taken with him. Danny Bulford from the Freedom Convoy had his picture taken with him. Chris Scott, Jeff Rath, Eva Chekiak kissed him on the cheek. But I noticed there was no time. Was there a picture with him and you together? And I'm now suspicious that you, in fact, are actually behind the most Albertan man in the world because you have never been in the room together.
Never at the same time. Well, this is the most Albertan channel in the world, Keith, so I wouldn't put it
And
past it.
thank you for the moniker you gave me the other day. Was it the most Albertan lawyer?
As well, that's we'll take it. We'll take it. No, I wish I were behind the most Albertan man in the world, but I know he's roaming around somewhere. Hopefully, we can get him on the channel at some point soon to talk about
Probably.
where
Well,
Alberta's
then
headed.
that's the only way you can disprove it's not you, right?
Well, that's what I say. Well, unless he wants
Because
to come on and
you guys
officially
have,
dub Unacceptable
we know it's
Fringe.
not Marty from up north because we've seen them together. So it's the only way to
He's
prove it's
too
not you.
tall. He's too tall for me. That's Keith, thank you for coming on and explaining everything to everybody. I really appreciate it, and it's always good to have you on to kind of unmuddy the waters for everybody. And we'll look forward to hopefully chatting with you in the new year to see where we're at on the independence train. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for the important work you do, Derek. I'm really grateful.
I'll always keep it up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.